Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 tech boundaries we all need. In fact, this is kicking off a 3-part series, so we're not going to cover all of it today, but we're going to be talking about how all of us need to have intentional boundaries around the time we use with our tech, the location of our technology, and which technology we use. I did, in fact, want to do them all in one, and then very quickly realized, oh no, time has 4 subpoints, and it's not going to work. So today we're just going to talk about time. We're going to talk about how do we set set boundaries around time. That is the total amount of time, the time of day that we use our technology, and how many times in a day. And I'll break each of these out. But the conversation is, hey, there's practical things we can start today when talking about healthful tech and intentional tech with our games, with our social media, with the shows that we watch, with our smartphones, with whatever technology we may have, and specifically talking digital tech and both tool and drool tech. But drool tech tends to be the one that eats more of our time. I don't have a ton of people misusing Microsoft Word. It can happen. There's certainly ways to be sneaky with it, but by and large, it's drool tech that's creeping into our life, that's finding little nooks and crannies of time and space that we may want to reclaim. And today's conversation is going to help us do that. So that is our goal. What healthful boundaries do we need around our tech time? So diving right in, we're going to look at really 3 areas. The total amount of time, as I mentioned, the time of day. So when in a day should that total amount of time be used? And then in how many sessions should it be used? And that's not just nuance. That is actually really important. There was a 4th point that I've just rolled into that. But it does matter if it's all in one bulk sum or if I'm breaking it out into smaller sessions. And I'll explain a little more when we get there on why that matters, but I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in every family that we talk to through conferences, through emails and texts, through social media, direct messages, as people have questions. That is absolutely something we need to look at. We're going to start first, though, with total time, and it comes down to priorities. The verse that I'm using for this is 1 Corinthians 10:23. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. This idea that there can be things that are not morally wrong. Absolutely. If it's morally incorrect, if it goes against God's commands for us, the 10 commandments, for example, Philippians 4:8. So you can go to Deuteronomy 6, or you can come to Philippians 4:8, and you can say, hey, what would be a godly way to handle my technology? Absolutely. And there's some immoral stuff out there. It produces bad fruit. Go to Galatians 5:19 through 21. And if it's causing envy and lust and anger and dissension and jealousy and any of those, let's get rid of it. But now we're talking about, all right, this is okay tech. It's not morally wrong. It's not trying to get me to do something against God's will. But first things first, just because it's okay morally doesn't mean that it's something I need to do. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. And I love that reminder when talking to our children, like, hey, I'm not mad at you and this isn't bad, but it's not good. And that's why we're not going to play it now, or we're not going to watch it now, or you don't get to watch it. And maybe other kids can. That is the conversation we can have. And I absolutely love 1 Corinthians 10:23 as our basis for this, because we want to be intentional with our time. I'm reminded of Andy Crouch, his beautiful book, The Tech-Wise Family. It's maybe a decade old at this point, but if you get a chance, check out The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch. This quote is very motivational and inspirational to me. If we don't learn to put technology in all of its forms in its proper place, we miss out on many of the best parts of life in our family. So from page 17 from the Tech-Wise Family, I want to read it one more time. If we don't learn to put technology in all of its forms in its proper place, we miss out on many of the best parts of life in our family. Our tech, even at its best, is always going to make us an offer. That's the idea that he's getting at here. That it is going to say your wash machine, your smartphone, your car is going to say, hey, I'm going to make your life better in A, B, and C ways. And we need to go, all right, I get that. And I don't even doubt you. I believe technology that you're going to improve my life. The question is Am I putting you in the proper place? I love that question. Is my technology, not just is it good or bad, but is it in the right spot? Is it getting the right amount of attention, the right amount of value, and is it providing me the right amount of offset value for what I'm giving up to get it? And that's our question really here that we want to start on. That we're going to do that by checking our priorities. We did this a little bit previously, and I've honed it a little. I think I was a little scattered in my previous attempt to talk about prioritizing our time. It's going to be two parts. The first part in prioritizing our time is where do we spend it? And I want you to break your day down into 30-minute increments. Just sit down and write it for yesterday, or I did it for yesterday. You can write it down for today, whatever it is. But 30-minute increments, you can literally set a timer for an hour. And when the timer goes off, just write down what you did. 2 things you did in the previous 30 minutes. What was the bulk of it? And I understand you might have done one for 17 minutes. Okay, but if it was the bulk of those 30 minutes, that's your activity. Break it into 30. I like to call these jots. I like that idea of a little, both the language arts side of an iota, a jot. This is just a little itty bitty dot of time. And that little bitty dot of time, everyone has the same amount. There's 48 jots in a day. In my day, I actually did this. Here's my example from yesterday. A day in my life on average is going to be 16 jots for a work day. I work 8 hours a day. It's not always one consistent bulk because I work from home and it can be a little flexible. So mealtime generally comes like breakfast. Generally, I've already started work and then I go and I do breakfast with the family. But there's 8 hours of work in there. Sometimes I go pick the kids up or I take somebody to sports, but there's 16 of my 48 jots go to work. Boom, done. Then if I go through, all right, I sleep roughly 7 hours a night. 14 more jots. So between my job and my sleep, I'm in 30 of my 48 jots. Now, this is not always the case. Sometimes I sleep less. Occasionally I get more. That's incredible. If I can work myself up to 8.5, 9 hours, come on, that's a great day. I have found that as I get older, my body just refuses to sleep. Which is a fun little game it likes to play with me, where it'll just wake me up. And now I'm just up and I get to decide like, does one just get up at 3:15 and just start your day? Or do you like fight it and hope you can get another hour and a half out of it? Maybe if you have good ideas on that, you can let me know. But that is something that I get to process. My jots go 30 between work and sleep. And then meal and day prep. This is anything from getting the kids ready to eating meals with my family to prepping meals. I do occasionally some of the meal prep. That's 8 jots. 4 hours of my day is going to be prepping, eating, and somehow dealing with meals, cleaning up from it, getting kids their meals, prepping for lunches, those kinds of things. And I will say Anna by and far preps lunches because so many small details and I will always forget something. That's just side note, not to do with jots. I will exercise for 2 jots on an average day. I will read my Bible for 1. And this was super humbling when I wrote this down. I was like, oof, I see it. All right, but that's what it is. And then I'll drive for generally something like 3. So if you were to add all those up, that's 44 of my 48 jots right there. Sleep, work, meals, workout, Bible, driving. The rest of it is generally filled in with watching an evening show or doing yard work or getting distracted. And I do track this. There are times in my list, because I run my entire workday off jots. I just didn't want to bore you with all those details of like the 30-minute breakouts. But I will have a 30-minute where I'm like, I got just rabbit holed. I'll go look for something and I'll find something else. And it's not on my goals and it's not a priority for today. And I didn't even need to do it, but I just really felt like it needed a solid 30 minutes of my life. And so that's in there. Kids doing sports, that takes time. Yes, the driving, but also just being there and seeing other families and spending that time. Could I be more efficient with that? Potentially. I could go to my car and take out my laptop and do work. But also I'm really deliberate in wanting to be present and missional with the people that are in my life. This is part of the garden God has cast me into, is the sports that we've prayerfully chosen for our family. So I'm going to be there, and that's going to get some of my jots. And then family time. Maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a game, whatever we're going to do as a family. Maybe it's a devotional that is going to be part of the time that fills in those remaining 4 jots. So I've got 48 jots, the exact same number you've got. The question is, how are we spending them? And the second part of that is, all right, we know where they're going. Do they line up with what I want? Those 48 jots that I've got, is that proper priorities based on how I am feeling called and convicted as a child of God and as a leader of my family. We've got to choose how to spend our time. I love this, Galatians 2:20. This is a reminder that all of us have the same 48 jots in a day, and none of us actually have free jots. Here's Paul. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. I love this reality as believers that we were bought as a price. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 6:20, that our lives and therefore our time no longer belong to us, but they belong to God. And we are now going to prayerfully use them to see his kingdom come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The good works, as Ephesians 2:10 reminds us, that God prepared beforehand for us to do. So Galatians 2:20 says, I've been crucified with Christ. I died with him. He now lives my life. So even my time, the stuff I used to call free time, it's not free. It came at a great cost. And that cost might be spent on something that I am excited to do, but not always. Sometimes there's just stuff that needs to happen. Needs for other people. I'm going to go serve them because they need this to happen, or needs for myself. I need to take care of my physical well-being. I need to take care of my family. And it's a need. And so I'm going to take care of that. Not necessarily because I feel like it today, but because it's important. And so that gets some of my jots. Does it line up with the priorities God has called us to is the second part. When I look through my list, I recognize that there are areas that, you know what, that's probably not in line with where it needs to be in terms of what gets the most time and in what order it gets it. Some things just need to move later in the day. And by that, I mean, maybe it's a fine thing to do, but I'm putting in a priority that it's the thing I make sure I always do. So this is why I've started reading my Bible in the morning, because I was like, oh, I'll read Bible at night. It works fine. We have that time I'm going to read right before bed. That's going to be my quiet time. There's no reason to do it in the morning. There's no Bible verse about it, right? Like this was my very college and just post-college kind of stick it to the man. I'm not going to do my quiet time. I don't call it that. That's too formulaic. And then I realized that without structure and without it being the first thing, life gets busy and life happens and I fatigue. And all of a sudden it's been a week and I haven't been in the Lord's word. And God doesn't love me any less, but my passion for the Lord starts to get distracted, if not wane. And all of a sudden, parts of Nathan's flesh, part of my flesh start to just kind of grow up. And these weeds start to sprout of anger and of anxiety and of lust and of any number of other just jealousy start to take root, take hold, and grow and bring death to different areas of my life. And I realized, man, I need to make that a priority in order. Yes, it needs time in my day, but it needs to come first. So that's the first thing you might notice. The second thing is maybe some stuff just gets too much time. I love this. It's not just believers who believe this. Kevin Kelly, he's the co-founder of Wired Magazine, one of the preeminent tech magazines in the United States. He wrote this in his book, What Technology Wants. I continue to keep the cornucopia of technology at arm's length so that I can remember more easily who I am. And that is such a great challenge for all of us to go, all right, what are my priorities? And am I keeping the technology at an arm's length, or is technology setting my priorities for me? When I reflect on my life, I recognize first, man, I want more time in prayer and scripture. Maybe it's not one more bulk time. It's not going to be a bolus of an hour. Maybe it is, but maybe it's going to be an extra 15 minutes. As a little lunch break. Maybe it's going to come at a different time in the day. Maybe it'll be with the family. Maybe it'll be by myself. It'll be on a walk. But just I'm seeing how many jots I'm giving to other things, and I want to be more rooted and grounded. And familiarity with the Lord and in his presence and with his word is the way to do that. So I want that. I want to be reading more edifying content. You will hear in there, reading was nowhere in my 48 jots. I do read. It tends to come either when I get a wild hair or through an audio book, like I'll reclaim driving time with that. But sometimes there's humans in the car that they really just don't want to read or listen to Brad Smith talk about tools and weapons. A delightful book, by the way, if you get the chance. I want to read edifying content. And I want less time with my email. I had a work breakout that made up those 16 jots for work, but email is way too much. I've been previously really great about, hey, I'm going to check my email on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to focus on work and creating and being in those other areas. And it has worked. And I have an amazing admin, and she makes sure that my emails are broken into different categories. So there's a folder that's just stuff you need to read today. I make sure I get through that folder on Tuesday and Thursday, right? Like that's a feature that I have. It's already built in. I don't have to build that. And yet I burn multiple jots in an average day, just feeling important as I get stuff done and I checklist my email. But if it's not on my priorities, I shouldn't be doing it. And that's just a way I can prayerfully trust the Lord. Hey, I don't need to go churn and burn my email to go make my job or my ministry happen. I can trust you, Lord. And I'm going to leave that for a time so that I can be faithful in doing this other work you've also called me to do with the limited time I've got. The takeaway from our first one is let's build time expectations. The first boundary we need around time is the expectation of where that time's going to go. Let's do what Andy Crouch encourages and keep our tech in its proper place. The second boundary then that we need to build around time is the time of day. Question, what's the earliest time of day that you check your tech? What's the earliest? I have found that if I check my tech later, my day goes better. I wake up, I do a quiet time, I take a shower, I make breakfast with the family and maybe do some work, but I don't check my email. I do not check Instagram. I do not do any of the drool tech parts of my job until well into my day, sometimes until a particular day of the week, if I'm not being distracted. And that is important for me because I find I'm less anxious and I'm more focused. And when you have ADD, you gotta work to get both of them. So my life involves a really simple alarm clock, so I don't have to check my phone. I've mentioned it before. I'll put it in the notes. The Lexon Flip Plus. I use the travel one. That's the little one. It's not perfect. You might have a better one. It's one I like. It's $30 for the travel version. That's the smaller version. And it got me up this morning so that I could go do my workout early. That needed to be bumped up so that other life stuff in the afternoon could happen and not compete. And reading and shower and breakfast and family out of the house. And then I'm going to check my texts. That's the first thing I check on my technology to make sure family didn't have a crisis or something. And then I go to work. And sometimes it involves the internet, but I don't start with my email. Both because Cal Newport really drives that home in his book, Digital Minimalism. It's a phenomenal book if you want to read it, Cal Newport. Please check that out. He's also the one who challenged me on the days of a week that you don't need to check your email every single day. Not true for everybody. Some people, your job is absolutely built around communication via email. But his challenge of do your deep work first. Oh, and that's his other book, Deep Work. Another great book where he drives this point home. But do your deep work. If you are in a creative job where it involves or requires long periods of focus, do it. This is also a great example for our children when we're thinking about, okay, children, what are our priorities as a family? And secondly, what time of day are we going to use that tech? Know that the drool tech, the quick hitting tech, the tech that's built around building lots of habits through lots of repetition is going to be the tech that fights creative endeavors. Creativity in terms of like we are made in the image of a creative God who's designed us to create and to make and to do the work of bringing what hasn't been into reality and existence. It's a way we can worship God. I'm not saying that you go and doing an art project replaces church. I am saying that you using your God-given gifts and submitting them to God's call. There's a morality and ethics to creating art or to creating anything, but that you can glorify God very much in that. And that you can see God more clearly when you are in a space of taking vulnerable risks and making things that glorify God with the passions and the talents he's given you. So I am saying that, and I'm saying a lot of this technology, the time of day matters for when we engage it. Tech like social media, video games, texting, audiobooks, music. Nothing morally wrong with any one of those, and yet there is a right and a wrong way to use them. Put them into basic categories. Are we going to use this tech, whatever the tech is you're looking at, before school? Are we going to use it before breakfast? Are we going to use it after school, but before our next meal? Are we going to use it after our meal, but before bed? Are we going to use it at what time of day? And this is a beautiful thing you can do with modern tech. Here's a pro tip. You can do this with almost every gaming console. You can do this if you have a hedge built around your network, if you use like a Griffin router or a Bark Home. But if you have smartphones, you can do this. And you can do this with dumb phones too. So I guess I'd just say phones in general. You can put a hedge on a time limit around your devices, and you absolutely should. With young people, this could look like, hey, you know what? You can use this app for this amount of time between these hours. So break that down. It means, you can play a game. You can play it between 3 and 5, and you can play it for 30 minutes. Those are absolutely time parameters that are reasonable and possible for every parent, not just the most technologically advanced. If you're talking smartphones, the two things you want to know on an iPhone, you're going to want to use parental controls. If you are using an Android, you're going to want to use Family Link. And I'll talk more in the next section about how you actually set those up. And I'll have links for that in the show notes. So if you go to the page for this podcast, you can find those at the bottom. But the basic walkthrough, the idea here is there are ways to control your technology, specifically your internet connection, so that even, let's say on your Wi-Fi, you have a Bark Home. You can set it so that your Roomba and your Nest stay on the internet, but the school laptops don't. Now, that breaks if you have an iPhone that is uncontrolled and it has cell service, and that cell service can make a hotspot. And now the device can connect to the hotspot, not your family Wi-Fi. So keep that in mind. Adding a smartphone that has something like a hotspot that's uncontrolled does add nuance to the confusion of using technology well and putting boundaries around when and then how long we're using our technology. Those are the first two things. What's the priority of our time? Where are we putting it all? And then what time of day are we using this technology? What's coming first in sequential order? What do we use first in the day? And within our day, based on our priorities, let's let our priorities in the day choose when we engage with tech and build hedges around it to remain intentional. Hedges like controls around our Wi-Fi, so something like the Bark Home or the Griffin, and then controls around our devices, which brings us to our third. So we know how much time we're spending and what time of day we're spending. And to just really drive that home, I use the example of a smartphone. You can decide, hey, 3 to 5, you can play a game, but that also works with watching shows. So in our family, we chose, you know what, based on our priorities, we have yet to make enough time before school to enjoy a show. We have a list. We have animated lists. Let's be serious. And it's fantastic. It includes things the kids need to do. Our kids leave for school at 8 a.m. So starting at 7 a.m., we start a list of what to do. It involves brushing your teeth. It involves reading your Bible. Not for Hadley. Hadley does the family devotional. And for family devotional, a lot of times we use the Louis Giglio Indescribable series. There's, I believe, 3 books. They're good. They have a fun fact about science, and it drives it back to a truth about God, and it challenges us to be in awe of who God is and what that looks like. If you want to use the New City Catechism or just walk through the Bible, phenomenal. Please do. But I digress. What I was trying to say there was this list of what to do involves from reading the Bible to doing daily prep stuff, brush your teeth, to helping with a family chore to practicing piano. That's an hour. So before 7 a.m., we don't want to incentivize getting up early. We don't want to say, hey, you know what you should do? Wake up at 6:30 and you can get 30 minutes of TV in. We just go, hey, you know what? In our family right now, it's not going to work. You can sleep. If you wake up early, you can play or read a book and then start your chores and then go to school. Then you come back from school and that's where our show time is. We have sometime between 3 o'clock and 4:30 or 5. There's generally going to be some kind of a show on an average day. I'd say 3 days a week during the school week. Sure, you're going to watch a show. We have rules on that. 30 minutes is our limit. And that brings us then to, all right, it's the end of the day. On a Friday is our movie night. We've picked a day. We've picked the long form on that day. Yes, you can watch a movie. It could even be a full movie. It's going to be 90 minutes to 2 hours of entertainment, tech. Cool, fine. But it stays there. And if for some reason we're gone on a Friday, that doesn't mean we're going to make it up. It doesn't suddenly move to Saturday or to Sunday. It just goes, you know what? We missed our day. And next week, it's still your day. We have each family member gets a day to pick it because tech, everyone has their opinions. So that's the way we've chosen to do it. Whatever the way is you've chosen to do it, know that you need to know how much time you're going to spend. And you need to know when in your day that comes. When are we going to use the tech? Because the third is how many times. And this might seem overly nuanced, but please hear me out. What I mean is the total amount of time isn't always our biggest concern. Anna and I realized this a little bit ago. We checked our screen time use because we both have iPhones, and our screen time use under, what is it under? Oh, it's just under screen time. Under screen time. The time on screen I was a third of Anna's time. I was 1 hour, she was 3 hours for the day. And I felt pretty good about myself. And then we checked the number of actual use sessions, meaning the times you logged into your phone and used one of your apps or one of your programs. I had used mine 3 times the number of Anna. She'd used 40 times. I'd used 120. Here's what that means. I was only in 1 hour during the day, but I had checked my phone compulsively, meaning I was under a minute in some of mine. What am I doing in under a minute? And I probably was just checking text messages. Just, oh, nobody wrote. How about now? Did anybody write? Did anybody write? Did anybody write? It probably was a writing day and I was feeling really stressed and I was just checking my phone for an excuse to be distracted. And my phone's really boring. Like it doesn't have social media or anything cool that I can actually go to and burn time. So I'm just compulsively checking it. Whereas Anna, 40 times means for 3 hours means she's getting longer sessions. Here's why that matters. Total time does matter, but think of these 2 examples. Imagine you went to your favorite streaming service and you watched one show for 30 minutes. That's scenario 1. And then in scenario 2, you go to YouTube and watch YouTube Shorts for 30 minutes. Of those 2, which is more likely to build a habit in you? Well, the answer is YouTube. You get 29 more reps of watching YouTube videos in the same amount of time because they're 30 to 60 seconds. And you're going to watch a lot more content. Just the sheer pace of the content can make you anxious. You're watching so many different videos from so many different creators across a range of topics. You can feel anxious just consuming that rate of information. And then there's also the fact that 29 different times you clicked on a different video, and that both gave the company data about your viewing habits and your interests, but it also built a habit in you that you have 29 more reps of saying yes, yes, versus 1 of saying, I'm going to watch this show, and 30 minutes later it's over and you walk away. That is important. How many times in a day are you going to get a chance to use your technology? And this is important for us to talk to our kids about. When they go, hey, can I watch TV right now? Absolutely. Let's talk about what you're going to watch. Please pick long form. Please don't just throw your kid on YouTube Shorts. It's bad for the brains. It's a habit building product. It is intended to keep them, and it is going to make them anxious and overstimulated. So choose something long form. Maybe it's Amazon Prime. Maybe it's Disney. Maybe it's your favorite streaming service. But you are going to, or maybe it's a DVD you have, so there's no ads. But you are going to pick a show. Maybe it's 10 minutes. Maybe it's 30. So you could pick Bluey or you could pick Wildcrats. But they're going to be edifying, they're going to be ethical, and they're going to line up with your family's expectations, but they're also going to be long form. They're going to be videos that have an arc that makes sense and that don't focus on overstimulation. Can you still get long form stuff that's overstimulating? Yeah, Powerpuff Girls, right? It's a longer form video, but my goodness, does it scald your eyes. So you can do that, but just keep that in mind. Let's be intentional about how many times we use our tech, not just how long we use our tech. So when we're talking about tech boundaries in our families, let's reflect. We're going to make sure that we have loving boundaries around our time and use of tech. As followers of Christ, we remember that we have new life in Christ and our time is no longer our own. We are new creations and our life is now Christ's. There's no free time. So with our 48 jots in a day, with our 24 hours, we're going to use it deliberately, intentionally, and we're going to encourage our children and parent them in a way that reflects that. So yes, son or daughter of mine, that is appropriate tech. We have time for it. It fits the priorities of our family, and this is how often we're going to use it. Maybe you're going to make sure when we watch our shows, it's going to be one bolus of time. Maybe you go, you know what? I'm going to let you use it for an hour, but an hour in a single go is just too much. We're going to split it into 3 20-minute chunks. All right. You know the window those 3 20 minutes need to fit. And you know that, you only had time for 2 today, and that's okay. This isn't a contractual obligation. This isn't a human right. This is a choice because I care about you and I want to give you good things. So we're going to take what we can and we're going to make sure it fits within the priorities, the other priorities of our life. Remember that we're writing down the time we spend. That's my first challenge to you. Before we remember, let's go to challenges. The first challenge, let's write down the time we spend in 30-minute jots. Let's ask ourselves, do my jots, my current use of time, do they align with my priorities and what I actually want to see? So first is, how am I using it? Second is that actually what I want? And the third is what's the total amount of time we're going to spend? Total jots in a day that are going to go to tech. When are they going to happen and how many times? Which brings us then to our reminder. Remember that it is perfectly loving to remove unhealthy tech. I know it's another conversation for another day. I just want to add that in. Sometimes there's no amount of time that makes sense of a particular tech or for a particular child. You are loving your child if you see it hurting him or her or someone else in their life, to remove that technology, to cut it off and gouge it out, as Jesus tells us in Matthew 5:28-30. If it brings sin, if it brings death, if it produces fruit in alignment with sin and death, then take it away. Start with 30 days. That's the reset time for overstimulation. And then work from there and say, hey, is it just a time of life? Is it the tech and you and a personality situation? Or am I missing something about this technology? Or am I missing something in your life that's making this technology unhealthy? So I wanted to add that. Yes, managing time, but the goal isn't just fix the time. The goal is use time wisely. And sometimes any time is too much for a particular kid. Me in video games, for example. I don't get video games because they're unwise for me. I don't have a dial. I just have a switch and I have to keep that switch off. So just know that might be the case with your family and know that you are loving and doing that. I hope this was encouraging to you. My hope to you is that we will use our time well and that we will start it today. Today, talk with your family about these three. How much time are we spending on tech? And when we use our time, how much in a given session and what time of day? Let's talk that out. Let's see if we can bring up some interesting conversations. You might be way off of your spouse or off of your kids in that expectation. And if you don't know where to start small. Say, hey, we're going to use this once a week for 30 minutes. Cool. And they go, whoa, hey, that's not enough. Now you've got a talking point. You've got yourself a conversation. Go, all right, cool. What would be enough? Interesting. That sounds like way too much. Let's talk about our priorities. But now you have this opportunity to walk your child through your family, through your faith, through how you get to that conclusion because you love God and want to serve him and use your time well because it's a gift. And you don't just want to be willy-nilly with it. You want to be deliberate and intentional, not legalistic and say, no, we never have fun because fun is a waste of time, but saying, hey, our fun needs to glorify God. And it needs to submit to what he tells us is fun and good. So have that conversation, start today with it, and enjoy that. And if this was encouraging or challenging to you, would you share it with someone else who might benefit from it? Would you send them to our website, gospeltech.net? You can go to /podcasts, check out the podcast there. They can listen anywhere podcasts exist. And if you have questions, would you reach out to me, Nathan@gospeltech.net? or on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Love God Use Tech. And would you join us next time as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech?